And it's worth mentioning that sometimes I remember that you've mentioned this before. Sometimes a judge will be really sympathetic to somebody, but even if they're telling the truth, even if the judge believes them, if they can't prove the elements, if the facts that they have aren't sufficient to show what's actually needed for a restraining order, the judge by law, by yeah, if they're respecting the law, has to deny the restraining order.
Yeah, I think
Um,
there's two ways of looking at that. There's the facts aren't sufficient for a restraining order. The person's subjectively afraid, but it's not reasonable for them to be in fear of imminent bodily injury. Look at all these text messages and these words that he said. It made me afraid for imminent bodily injury. Well, that's subjective, and no reasonable person would think that some impotent expression of frustration, to hijack a term in the stalking order field regarding speech, like you can have an impotent expression of frustration and people will be like, aha, he said something, it's a threat. And it's like, no, he didn't. He said this because he was angry that he hasn't seen his kids. And any reasonable person would know that was just an outburst of anger. It had nothing to do with actual violence. Now, if there's a history of violence and they say that, and every time they said that in the past, there's been violence, then that would be reasonable. Example, this is the quintessential example you hear a lot of prosecutors talk about. Somebody comes home, they take off their ring, they put it on the counter. Is that a threat of imminent bodily injury? Well, if every time that person got home and they took the ring and put it on the counter meant that they were going to cause violence, then that's imminent. Another example is you knew a guy, for instance, you knew a guy that owned an olive import business back in the 1940s, and he tells somebody that he's going to make you an offer that you can't refuse. Like, all right, well, let's do some business. But if every time he did that, a band leader ended up with violence, or a producer for movies ended up with a decapitated horse in his bed, you're going to take that as an imminent threat because that's its intent. There's no accidental threats. I mean, people say words that can be threatening that they don't intend to be threatening. What they're actually intending is, listen to my feelings of powerlessness and frustration, and I'm lashing out like a child, which is probably 90% of restraining order cases, is people that have impulse control and lash out on each other like children. Like, they get so frustrated that they have to use physical force, either side, mutual combat situations that you see where somebody gets hurt because someone smaller than them started, reacting violently to words, or finding somebody, being unfaithful, or whatever the motive is for the violence. And then when there is physical force, things happen and people get hurt. That's why violence should only be used when trying to protect yourself from imminent bodily injury or an active attack.